we leave this contrail. I know you've seen contrails up here from our planes here, but the Germans then would concentrate on that contrail and they'd pick up our airspeed. And then they would set their guns to that. And that's what you see in that picture coming around your flak there. There's also what they call tracking. They would set it up and track your plane right down. The tail gunner, it was his responsibility, if that was occurring, to notify the pilot. So without breaking formation or something, we could go up a ways or drop down a ways away, just throw that through, let it go through. And on occasion, we've had like a flak shell hit the front, it took off the whole front of the plane. There's enough power there and force. And we've had, and that's what my comments were about the plane. We've had some of them missing this whole rudder back here. Some of their elevators are gone, but they were still able to get that airplane back with a guy on board. Sometimes the captain would give a command to bail out, captain being the pilot. And some of the crew would go, some would not go, particularly if we had wounded on board and they couldn't get out. And we've had a number of occasions where it looked like the captain thought this plane was going down and he'd order the bailout, and some would refuse to stay with the person wounded. And that plane somehow got back to England. So it worked out well for them. But that's what happened on your flak story. And I know sitting there on a bomb run, I had a little bit, but anyway, on the bomb run, if we're at the bombing altitude, let's say 28,000, and it's 60 degrees out there, we're going to make a turn to a target. On the very first mission I flew was in October 25th, 1944, and our target was Hamburg, Germany, the second largest city in Germany. And I was up in the bombardier seat and we're going off this way, and our intelligence would try to tell you, try to steer clear of this area, heavy concentration of flak, or whatever. Well, I looked off to my left, and I saw this big black cloud over there. And on a bomb run, the bombardier is generally the communicator in the plane. I called them up and said, "Hey guys, look over to the left. That's a cloud of flak. Boy, aren't you all glad? I'm glad we're not going that direction." I no more got those words out of my mouth. And we made a big turn right toward that direction and flew right through that flak. But when you make that turn, students, the bombardier takes over the airplane. The pilot puts on automatic, and we control the airplane through the bomb site here. I'll come back to that later. And regardless of what's going on outside the bombardier, he's concentrated on this instrument, and flak can bust all around him. But he holds right there because he only has a few minutes, and he's got to make that exposure worthwhile. He's got to put those bombs on the target. And while this was going on my first mission, our autopilot caught fire down underneath. So both the navigator and I had to go on portable oxygen, get the fires put out, and we had one engine shot out. Well, fortunately, the shoot out of the engine occurred after we had dropped our bombs and we had used up half of our gasoline. Now that airplane carries 2,700 and some odd gallons of gas, high octane aviation gas, plus all your bomb load. And if you lose that engine before you get to the bomb target, you can't maintain altitude. So you've got to jettison and try to get back to your base. In the early years, before D-Day and the invasion, we didn't care where we let those bombs go. But after D-Day, and our troops were down there, we had to go out over the North Atlantic. We had a drop zone out there, and that's where we had to put those bombs. And I learned this the hard way. And we got back, and they came out to greet us because we weren't supposed to be back yet after 6 hours of flying and stuff. And I said, well, I guess we get credit for the mission anyway with all this. He said, well, no. You have to cross that target. If you don't cross the target, you don't get credit for a bomb run. So all the guys in the Air Force, particularly those that were flying, were volunteers. They could quit anytime they wanted to. But they didn't quit. They kept on and kept on because they had a mission. They had a target to get to. And turning back never got it done. And we had very few turnbacks, except mechanical or something of that nature. Anyway, that's what happened on my very first mission. And there was a saying floating around the base that if you could make it through the first 5 or 6, you might stand a pretty good chance. And that was when we only had to do 25. But we were losing so many people, so many airplanes, that they raised it up to 30 missions before you were through. And then they raised it another 5 to 35. That's where I got caught. 35 missions. Didn't help morale a lot, but it did help the war, so on.
You're speaking of that first mission. Could I ask about that mission? What was it? Do you recall any of the feelings that you had as you and your crew members went up over Hamburg for the
on the first mission?
Yeah, what were you feeling? You recall?
Well, it was pretty mixed at first. When you go out and get in that airplane, which is right after your briefing, they come around and get you up 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and you got to get the briefing. They don't furnish anyway. You just got to get there. And so after briefing, the gunners go out and make sure all the guns are in and everything, and the ammo belts are hooked up. Bombardier, navigator, pilots, we go to separate briefings, so forth. And then we get out there. Well, it's kind of exciting then. Boy, this is what I've been hearing about. This is what I read.
One interruption. Tell them how old you were at that point. What age were you? It's important.
I just turned 20. And
Not much older than several of these guys.
well, I'll drift off a minute. I flew across the ocean with my pilot. He and I were the only ones awake. The rest of the crew was sleeping on my 20th birthday. We flew out of Goose Bay, Labrador, and we had to go into Iceland. And they pushed us out at night at 12 o'clock, which was highly unusual because they always made it a day trip. They wanted to get us out there, a tremendous storm, and coming down, there was a beam, radio beam cutting down across the Atlantic. And when we took off from Goose Bay, in the dark, it was raining, low ceiling, we couldn't get above it. We had to stay below it. We had about 100 feet between the water and us.
Whoa.
And we had to hit that beam and then make a left turn and follow the beam into Iceland. Well, we got there, of course, they weren't expecting us, but it took well after its name, Iceland. We overnighted in, I think, ice bags, not sleeping bags. It was extremely cold, and we got up and left there. But that all occurred on my 20th birthday. And to finish that up, I flew all my combat missions and all the things that happened, and I was back home, and I was still 20. And I think an interesting factor would be for you guys. I got home, and there was a neighborhood girl. I asked her if she wanted to go to a movie. She said, yeah. We went to the movie, and after the movie, I felt, boy, I wanted something to drink because they furnished the drinks over in England. I didn't care for their warm beer, and I didn't drink much of the whiskey. But I went and I thought, well, I'll have a beer. And I asked her if that was all right. She said, yeah. We went into this nice looking bar place, and then I walked up and I told the guy what I wanted. He said, how old are you? I said, I'm 20. He said, well, get out of here. I can't serve that. I said, wait a minute. I said, I flew this many missions. I fought over there. The abuse and freedom. You tell me I can't have a drink. I can't have a beer. I was getting excited about that time. But I laughed. But it sure wounded my ego, I'll tell you. After all that combat and everything, you know. Anyway, that's...
Go back to Gary's question. How did you feel on your first mission?
Well, it was, like I was saying, it was exciting. You get out there, it's new. You've heard a lot of these stories. You're looking around to see what's true and what's not true. And you get in this airplane, and you've had your first briefing. And the moment you enter that airplane, that B-17, you are a different person. You are not you. You've had training. You've been exposed to all this stuff. And now it's what they call add-up time. And it's exciting, and yet you're looking ahead with a lot of apprehension. And one of the worries that always seems to be in a male's mind, boy, am I going to add up at the right moment? Am I not going to break down? Or am I going to face this situation as a male, as a man, what I'm here to do? And you have that kind of conflict going on. And you're watching for fighters and so on, and your adrenaline is up. And I think the worst that happens is when you finally get into this situation, you're so darn busy doing what I got to set this, I got to do that, I got to pull this button, and that kind. You're not thinking about that. But after the bombs go out, and you feel the plane go up like that a little bit, it's like a total collapse in the sense of you're going, boy, and you're kind of relaxed, you're flying back towards England. And you had that kind of thought on every mission.
You felt that 35 times?
35 times. Now, I've heard people say, well, those routine takeoffs, what were you doing? There was never a routine takeoff. There was always, you always had three that you could count on: weather, fighter, and flak. They were always there. So you're taking off with a plane with that ahead of you. On one occasion, we crashed on takeoff. Nobody could understand this one exactly, but they lined us up, and your planes were all lined up behind each other on the perimeter. And each plane came up to the taxi runway, takeoff runway, excuse me, and they turned, set the brakes, rev it, and go. Every 30 seconds you had a plane coming in like that and taking off. Well, on this particular day that we crashed, we were the number 3 ship to go off. They had us on the shortest runway, believe this or not, trees at the other end of the runway, and we had in the past had planes land with little pieces of those trees in their undercarriage. Well, the plane in front of us, we noticed it was having trouble, but we were taking off in a crosswind. And he straightened up and got off, and it was our turn. And we got going down the runway, and we were at 105 miles an hour, bomb load and gas load. And the wind caught this big rudder tail.
I'm going to give you a different.
Here.
I'm going to give you a different picture here.
Yeah, that's it. That's all right. It caught that tail, and people at 105 it turned us like that, and we're going right over unfinished ground, rough stuff, cloud stuff, and I'm looking ahead, and right in front of us is one of the old hay cutters with that arm sticking up, you know, when it's down, it's cutting the grass like this. And I said, my God, we got to straddle that thing or we're gone, because it would take out it would take out one side of our landing gear, and then when we'd go down on the wing, and that would be it. But the pilot was a good pilot, and we were able to straddle that hay cutter. But with the arm up, it caught our ball turret underneath, and it peeled it right back, just like a can of sardines. And we continued, and the other planes going around the perimeter saw what was happening, so they stopped, and they gave us a passageway through. The pilot cut the controls and cut the ignition, and we went between these other B-17s and down a hill, and would you believe, right into the dump, the base dump. Well, we were out of that plane before it got stopped hardly. Red lights, sirens, and all that stuff going. And we got up, stood there. And we were fairly close to finishing up our tour. And each base always kept what we call the backup plane. In case something happened, some plane couldn't get started or so on, we'd have another plane ready to fill out what we had to do that day. And the crew, we took a boat and we said, well, let's go get one of the backups and go. That's what I was talking about a while ago. You keep at it, you go. Well, we got over France, and the pilot was pulling too much power for the weight, trying to catch our group in front of us, and we blew an engine. Well, now, this is well after D-Day, so we have to go out to that place out over the North Sea and drop our bombs. We couldn't even just go there any place. Which we did, and that's where we got back to our base, and we'd been flying 6 hours. We had a terrible takeoff. We destroyed one government plane. We had another plane, and we blew the engine on it. We dropped the bombs in the North Sea, didn't touch the target, and now we're back. And I told the guys, I said, well, that probably is worth a mission, isn't it? And that's where I learned that you don't get a mission unless you cross that target. And we didn't. Okay, that's a long question after flying, but how about some other questions? Hey, yellow shirt there.
You said that the B-17 was the favorite. If the B-24 was bigger and a faster flyer, why was?
B-24 was faster and it carried more bombs, but it couldn't stay up. It had what was called a Davis wing, a little narrow wing, and they didn't get much lift off that wing. If you look at your B-17, you have that nice big wing down there, gave you stability. And that's why the 17 became famous. It came back. The B-24s didn't. They were always called the boxcar, particularly by 17ers. Anyway, so that's 2 or 3 stories that are kind of mixed up that I hope you've been following. How are we doing on time?
Oh, we have got another half hour here. Carson, you had a question?
Excuse me, yes, you have.
You said it got to be like 60 degrees below zero up there. How did you keep warm?
What was that?
It was 60 degrees below zero in the plane. How did you keep warm?
Towards the end, they had improved. One thing you always need to remember, all throughout the war, everything was being constantly changed, tried to be improved. Aircraft like the B-17 never had those turrets out there. And I can't imagine an airplane had no guns on the front. Guns on the top, bottom, and the back, everywhere but the front. And the German pilots found that out real quick, and they just come right in, go under or over. But we had an electric suit. Worked off, of course, the batteries on the plane. In 60-degree weather, below zero, it would keep us fairly warm. Your hands would get a little numb, your feet would get numb, like that, but not cold where you couldn't function. In the earlier days, the guys had these big, thick wool things that they couldn't hardly move in them, and boots. And the waist gunners, those were the guys that really suffered from the exposure like you're talking about, because there was no blanket there, just open air coming in, 60 or whatever the temperature.
Wow.
Then they got smart and they made the plastic glass, fitted across there, and they fit the waist guns into that plastic glass, so that the gunner had 180-degree basically swing out there in that, and he could then keep comfortable with that kind of arrangement.
What was the name of your plane?
I'm sorry, sir.
Wondering, how did you guys name your plane? What name did you give it?
The name of your plane.
The name of my plane was Miss G, I want to go home. And they had 2 ways they spelled it. They used the government GI
Right.
or GEEIEYE.
Right.
This, I want to go home. It was kind of a catchy thing.
Yeah.
So forth. Now, I think I need 2 points I want to make. One, I told you a while back that these B-17s are taking off every 30 seconds. And we're flying out into the dark. And here you gotta keep 1,000 feet between airplanes. We were trying to get it down to 100 feet, 50 feet, or so on. So how did all these 36 ships, I'm a little ahead of myself, we'll maybe back up a minute. 8th Air Force was outside, headquarters was outside of London, and the headquarters code name was Pine Tree. And every morning, Pine Tree would teletype the bases that had been selected for the mission. And it would depend what was the target, what were the bombs that were being used that day. Was it oil, was it air base, or a submarine pen, or something of that nature? So they gave you the time to take off. They gave you the time, what was called the cross out, and cross in point out of England. You had a plus minus, a plus plus, and a minus minus on that cross out. If you didn't get it there at 10 o'clock, you could get there maybe at 9:59 or a minute after 10:01. Okay, this all came down from the headquarters, told how many planes would be used on this one, who was going to be the leader. Now, in the 8th Air Force was made of 3 divisions. First division, and I was in the first division. They had the second division, both divisions B-17s. Third division was made up of 24s, a miscellaneous group of C-47 cargo types, glider pullers, and fighters. So now you start wondering, well, it'll tell you how many groups are going to form up the bomber column. How many planes are going to fly over this place? And all of a sudden, you take off in combat wings. Each combat wing had 36 ships. You're taking off at whatever time in the morning, and they're flying around out there. Now, how do they meet up? How do they get together to make this bomber group? Well, when it first started, they didn't. Each group was bombing on their own. They were getting bad results, so forth. And so they started to change that. But as your group takes off, we had a radio beam out there. And we took off, and this is before the invasion. So we had to be at 20,000 feet before we even headed towards Germany. And we would take off, we'd fly out that way till we got to 10,000 feet. We'd do a U-turn and come back and pick up another 9,000. So we're at 19,000. Assembly altitude is 20,000. Now you got 36 ships out there flying around. They got to get into this assembly thing. Well, we had the lead squadron of 12, high squadron of 12, and the low squadron of 12. 36 ships. Each leader of that squadron had a different colored flare. he would shoot that flare off occasionally. You could see what altitude and where he was. And then as we did the circle, and we came around and against the east, excuse me, we'd pick up a little illumination, and you could see the plane. And you would have a certain spot in that formation that you had to get in. And so as each plane came around and they took off by according to the arrangement, we'd come up, there's where I'm supposed to be, and when the pilot would slide up, get into that spot, just barely missing each other over the wingtips. And we flew around up there to all 36 ships. We got into that formation. Now, we had to back up our time. The head navigator, when that teletype came in and said, you take off at this time, well, we had to back it up. Now, how long it's going to take us to get to crossout point? Because that was on the channel, we were over here on the west side of the Walsh. And, well, yeah, okay. How long would it take us to get there? And then from there, to get to that crossout point. So there was a lot of planning that had to be done to make this mission possible, make the trip worthwhile. And like I said in that book, we lost as many as 56 bombers, 60 bombers in a day. That's 600 men. Making a comparison to ground troops, that's a brigade. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 companies that come on up into battalions in the brigade. That's an awful lot of men. Now, when a while ago, I told you when you called in that B-17, you're a different person. Each member of that B-17 was highly trained for the position he was holding. So that we met down at Gulfport on the Gulf, and that's where we formed up our crews. And that was our first use of a B-17, because we flew in the smaller plane, 2-engine, 10,000. Now we're on a 4-engine plane, 20,000. And the bombs and everything was different. And what does the bombardier do? The bombardier, he has to get the airspeed, and what's called the true airspeed. And we have to get the outside temperature. We have to take the altitude. We have to get the number of bombs and the weight of the bombs. All of that data goes into instruments that's set over here on the wall. And that starts to control your bomb run. Now, to drop that bomb, the bomb site wasn't declassified until up in late 44. It was still, we carried 45s to protect that bomb site. So the information goes in, we're working and looking at the bomb site, and on there is what they call indices. One up here, one down here. That's your speed. On the bomb site down below are knobs that control drift, control the altitude and airspeed. As far as these crosshairs were concerned. The crosshairs in the bomb site, you put on the target, and then if they started drifting that way, you had to correct the knobs this way or up. And the point was you had to get those crosshairs standing still. right on that target. And you had only at the time as these things were coming together. They get here, the electric circuit is completed, out go the bombs. You feel your plane goes like that. That's what it takes to get it. And all that time, as I mentioned earlier, the bombardier is controlling that airplane, where it's going, up, down, sideways, the bombs out. Okay. You have the form up, which is very important. All that data comes down from Pine Tree, 8th Air Force Headquarters. And it tells what each group, where you're going, what kind of bombs you're carrying. So if you're going to an airfield, you set your bomb drops 100 feet apart. So as you go down that runway, you're putting it out of commission. Every 100 feet, we hit it with a bomb. So it's an oil pen, and then you carry the 2,000 pounders and so forth. I've had to weave back and forth through this. I hope it's made sense to you in the sense I've had to pull different things together. But that's kind of what you're experiencing on a bomb run. Well, as you get used to it and matured with it, you've been in flak, through flak and all that, it starts to lose its intensity in the sense. You know what can happen. One mission is was to Berlin. It was the largest mission bomber column that ever flew. 2,000 planes in the sky, bombardiers on every one. You had P-51 fighters up there protecting us, and so on. Now, the P-51 has a very important part in my life, because when I was back peddling those newspapers and things, my father was one of the managers at Packard. And when the P-51s came out, it was slow and it wasn't climbing and so on. And they went to what was called the Packard Merlin engine. And they put those in the P-51s. Made all the difference in the world, and they flew fighter protection. I had written home to my father and told him what a great sight it was to see these little friends up there flying around and helping. And my dad, I found this out much later, he called in his superintendents and foremen, and he said, I want the name of every person that doesn't show at his job spot Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. And when the draft deferment came around, it was surprising. Those guys' names didn't get on the deferred list. He figured if we're fighting over there, they could fight here the same way. I've always been impressed by the type of foundation that was required for everybody getting on that plane and doing precisely what you were trained to do and staying with it. And what we had to go through. Well, on this Berlin mission, and guys, I don't think we'll ever see another Air Force like what the United States had. We don't do that anymore by technology. So that's a gone thing. But we were on our way back to England, like an hour, maybe an hour and a half. I just estimated that. And I could look over there and still see the bomber column coming into Berlin. And while we were on the way back, a P-51 flew up beside us. And, we could almost reach out and shake hands, he was so close. He was happy, he was smiling. We were pleased to see him. Everybody was just feeling good. It's been a good mission. And we're looking at him and waving, and he disappeared. Just like that. The whole airplane blew up right there in front of us. Pretty shocking. We never could figure out what did it, because there were no fighters, there was no flag. What happened? We think he took a hit maybe over the target area, and it just got there, but that was purely speculation. But those are the kind of things that made each mission different. You could never say, well, it's routine. I didn't find anything routine about that. And it emphasized the fact that you still had those three out there, flag, fighters, and weather, but you had all this other stuff I've been talking about. I'm doing a lot of talking. Is there any more questions? Yes, sir.
Did you have any particular targets that you went after most often?
Do we have what?
Specific targets that you always went after, like the oil fields or the railroad yards or, excuse me,
I'm not sure I understand yet.
specific targets each
Oh,
time.
yeah, we had, it wasn't just random drop. We had specific targets. The oil fields particularly, we tried to get them on fire, put them out of commission, because that was for their tanks, that was for their airplanes, and everything. That was a major, major target area. And there was a great number of those. And they were very, very well protected. A lot of heavy flak around them.
I have a question, and maybe this will prompt something else from you. Did your 10-man crew stay together the whole time, or did you lose some people?
We stayed together. I went to 2 crews because they were taking celestial trained navigators and sending them to the South Pacific.
Hmm.
And as a bombardier, I had some small navigational training, which was labeled dead reckoning, and that was a good thing for me. Anyway, so I went to bed one night a bombardier, and I got up the next morning, and I was a navigator. And that really put the pressure on me, because the weather was bad. It was at Christmas time, the Ardennes break through over there, and the weather was rotten, and I'm over there to navigate. Well, we took off from our base, and we got 4 days of diversion down to the most western tip of England. They kept thinking we'd get out the next day, so they didn't send in anything but peanut butter and jelly and bread. And the place hadn't been cleaned for ages. It was a mess. And then we took off, and we had one chance to get to our base, and they closed it, so we all went different places again. So you're flying around up there in rather close, hazardous conditions. We finally managed to get off one day this was Christmas Day, on Christmas Day Eve. And we were trying to find our group, but we couldn't, so we hooked up with another group. We were also a photographic ship, and we took pictures of the bomb strikes and so on, and they came back to verification of going over the target for our group and so on. And we got back to our base. We broke off from this group, and I, as navigator, this was my first mission as a navigator there. And I'm really feeling the pressure. It was bad weather. The bases were socked in, and I found our base, got us right over the base, and we told them, the pilot told them we wanted to make one effort to land. They gave us one chance. And I had drawn on my map the magnetic headings of the runways and so on. And so I took us over to the center of the field. I flew I think it was a minute, 2 minutes this way, made a left turn a minute that way, and then came in for the runway. I got down to 75 feet, and we're still in the soup. And I was just reaching for the microphone to tell the pilot to take it off. I could not take the risk anymore. And we broke through. I broke through because on your plane, being up here, I was that much lower than the pilots. Not much, but I was much lower. And that was enough that I could see before they could. I told them to bring it on down, and which he did. He trusted me entirely. The pilot was up there, and I told him to bring it down. He couldn't see anything, but he brought it down. And that's what makes your combat crew, is that kind of endeavor, that kind of relationship. You have to build it, and so on. And we were the only ship that got into our base that night. That was Christmas Eve, 1944. And after we got back to the United States, I used to call the pilot and a buddy of mine up there on Christmas Eve, and we used to talk a few minutes about that Christmas Eve.
Have you had any reunions with, did you have any reunions with the crew after the war?
Yes.
The
Yes.
10 of you, all 10?
No, there was only those occasions, like where I said I was transferred, did we have occasion to break the crew bit, but we had these reunions. And now today, out of the two crew, 20 members, I'm the only person alive, all the rest are gone. So, anyway.
You all haven't asked what
I've
he
bored you
eats.
enough. Any more
Alan.
questions?
Tell them what you had to eat on a 6-hour, 7-hour
Oh.
mission at 60 degrees below zero.
I forgot that one. That's kind of funny. But I had two missions back to back. They woke us up at 1 o'clock. Went to briefing, or went to chow. And if you were on a mission, you got real eggs. Boy. And we had guys that would volunteer to go on a mission just to get some real eggs now and then for breakfast, you know. Well, we went to briefing, and we went on to target. We took off at 7 a.m. in the morning, 7 now. We didn't land until 6 p.m. that night. That's a lot of hours of flying through enemy skies and all of that. By the time we got the plane unloaded, we went to intelligence, went and had the dinner. It was time to get to bed. You could walk. The next day, the same place, same hours. The question came up sometime before. Well, what do you feed these guys on a mission like that? Good golly, they gotta have something to eat. And so they solved it. They gave us 2 chocolate chip cookies and a candy bar. And when it came 12 o'clock, I reached in to get them, and holy smokes, I could have used them for a hammer.
Frozen.
They were frozen, solid. We never could eat them until we got down almost back to England. You know. But I don't know if whoever thought that one up got a promotion or not. But if they'd put the vote to the crew, I don't think he would have passed. Anyway, Did I miss any of them?
We have about 5 minutes. Many of you we haven't heard from.
Yes.
Tyler?
Do you remember what kind of guns were on the B-17? Do you know anything about that?
What?
What kind of guns were on the
No,
17?
it's 50 calibers. Now, at first, they only had 30. That's where I was saying, oh, constantly through the war, everything, clothing, whatever, they were making improvements. They went from a 30 to the 50. They added the 250s up in front for the bombardier's position. And the B-17 at first was rated at 8,000 pounds. But because of the addition of the caliber, the weight of the guns, the weight of the bullets and so on, it reduced it down to about 4,500. And it reduced the airspeed. But at the same time, we got stronger engines. We were able to fly farther. We still couldn't outrun the boxcar, but that was it. Yeah. That answered your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing we did, and you can appreciate that maybe, is I'm not sure what airspace we were in that we did this, but all those with the turrets, top turret, ball turret, my turret, and everything, we aimed them all front. And then on my signal, we all fired. And you could feel a noticeable slowdown of the plane, the recoil from those guns. You know, they're going fast.
That's a big gun.
And this was slowing it down. It was amazing.
We've only got a couple minutes. Can you real quickly tell them about your jacket?
Your jacket.
What's the significance of everything on your jacket?
It's an A2. They call it the A2, the Air Corps. When I went in, it was called the Army Air Corps. And then somewhere about 4 or 5 months later, they changed it to Army Air Force. But this is the squadron emblem. I was in the 614 Squadron, the 401st Bomb Group. These are some decorations, but this one is important. The air medal here with a silver cluster. When you flew 5 missions, 5 of these missions across, you got an air medal. I flew 7 5s across, and it gave me 35. So they had to invent something, so they came up with the air medal with the silver cluster. And that nobody knows that unless you explain it. So it looks nice, sir, but that's it. And when you finish your 35, you got a free dip in the static pool around the place. Your friends helped you. Yeah, that's how many guys, including me, get out of there wringing wet. And I didn't get the cold like a lot of them did. I finished up in April.
So you went from October to April.
Yeah.
You flying those missions. Question?
I just wanted to add some. Alan, when you spoke about the bomb site, I may be the only ignorant one in the room, but I always thought it was S-I-G-H-T, you know, your site. But it's S-I-T-E, and it was an instrument, the Norden bomb site, which the Germans wanted, they didn't have, and that's why he said he carried the 45. If they were captured or anything, they would shoot to kill before they let them have that instrument.
Ah,
And I thought that was important.
yes,
I'll pass
yes.
this around. It's a schematic on the bomb site. And if you look down in the right side here, it tells you your speed knob, drift knobs. And this is what we always look through here. In the summertime, you could always tell the bombardiers because they had a black circle around their eye from
They called it the back of
These are
the
pardon this interruption. There are 2 additional announcements that I want to get in right before lunch here. All freshman and sophomore football players should see Coach Spence after lunch today. It's very important. Also, a reminder to our service council, there is a mandatory lunch meeting in the study hall.
Send this around.
Please be promised.
Oh, this is that. Hey, guys, before the bell rings, well, as the bell rings, let's thank Mr. Crawford. I can't imagine a clearer presentation of what it was
Really
like
my
to be on
pleasure.
B-17. Thank you so much, so much.